Comparisons can be made between Web3 ecosystems and large tech companies. Large tech companies are a great case study for Web3 ecosystems due to a number of overlapping areas. Over the last few decades, these tech companies have been some of the most desirable places to work on the planet. Now, that's partly due to ambitious global missions, but it's also coupled with great incentives and employee benefits. Now, these companies have obviously not got everything right. However, some great learnings can be made by looking at what has worked well for both the employees and for these companies. The comparison that we're most interested in thinking about here is around the idea funding process that is commonly used in Web3 ecosystems, and then comparing this with the working environment and the incentive structures that are used with employees within tech companies. Some of the overlapping areas that we can highlight include the number of contributors involved. So both these tech companies and Web3 ecosystems have a large number of skilled contributors that help with executing different ideas. These ecosystems have overlapping skill sets that are important to both ecosystems, such as software engineering, product design, coordination efforts, and research efforts. Web3 ecosystems and tech companies both are trying to solve global problems, which means solving global scale technical challenges, which means creating well-defined products and services that can be used by large populations. Both these ecosystems are involved in complex execution efforts. Whether that's AI, blockchain, or virtual reality, there's often execution efforts that span multiple years to actually create impactful products and services. And then finally, large tech companies and Web3 ecosystems both reach a scale where there are many shared problems within their ecosystem that benefit from shared solutions. React and GraphQL are a great example of this within Meta, where they first became an increasingly adopted solution within Meta, but not soon after then became open source and then generated wider impact across the entire software industry. That covers some of the similarities tech companies have with Web3 ecosystems. Now let's think about the working environment within these tech companies. The first important approach that these companies adopt is time-based incentives. Contributors are paid for their time based on an agreed salary. Once this amount is agreed, contributors do not need to be concerned with where and how they're getting paid, and instead can focus their entire attention on their own work efforts. Another observation we can make is around how bonus incentives are handled. Large companies often offer performance and impact-based incentives in the form of stock options, bonuses, and job promotions. Employee benefits might also exist, and these can further help with simplifying and improving the lives of employees so they can be more productive. Contribution flexibility is an important factor if you want to have a dynamic workforce. Companies often enable employees to move across teams and make impactful contributions where they are most needed. Employees do not need to be concerned with how they are going to get paid when they work across multiple teams and potentially help with multiple initiatives. Now, it's worth stating the obvious here that every company is not as flexible as others. Though, as a great example of a company on the really high end of contribution flexibility, this would be Valve Software. So employees in Valve are free to move and help with any project that interests them and where they believe they can add the most value. It might even be worth doing an entirely separate video just on how employees at Valve contribute day to day, as this would be a really good case study to learn from. In terms of collaboration, teams working on different projects and services can freely collaborate with any other team in the company if it made sense to do so. These employees all work in the same company, so ultimately, they're all on the same team. The incentives are fully aligned for employees to collaborate on any problems or opportunities that could be mutually beneficial for those teams and for the wider company. Ideas can also quickly change in these environments. Teams often have a moderate amount of autonomy when working on different products and services, where they will often have a leading influence on planning their own roadmap and delivery of new features and improvements. Now, this enables them to experiment and trial with new ideas quickly as different opportunities emerge without needing to seek approval from everyone else in the company. And finally, teams are often able to start and stop working on different ideas whenever it makes sense to do so. Some ideas just won't generate the intended outcomes that were desired, and in that event, a team can stop working on it as soon as this becomes obvious. If a team moves from one idea to another, this won't change or impact their incentives at all. Each employee and team are ultimately responsible for just making as much impact as they can for the company as possible. Now we've covered a bit about how these tech companies usually operate, but what about some of the common reasons why employees leave these companies? Designing a funding process for Web3 ecosystems can then consider how this new approach they're thinking of might be an improvement or not for resolving these types of issues. So, just to list some of the common reasons, employees might leave due to wanting to find a better work life balance, or if they're looking to find more meaningful work, better personal values alignment, or better career advancement. It could also just be due to burnout, management and leadership issues, entrepreneurial aspirations, relocation, or changing work interests. Okay, so now we've got a fairly good overview about some of the different factors relevant to large tech companies. Now let's try to compare the idea funding approaches in Web3 ecosystems against the approaches being more widely used in large tech companies. The first thing we can notice is there's less complexity to contribute in a large tech company. A potential employee just needs to submit their personal and professional information, often in the forms of a CV, to be considered by that company. Now, the promising candidates will then go through a one-time interview process and, if selected, can join the company and receive ongoing compensation. In comparison, Web3 ecosystem contributors need to define and suggest ideas ahead of time, which takes a large amount of upfront work to be considered for compensation. There's also increased complexity for Web3 contributors, as they need to do this each and every time they want to be funded for a different idea. Next is income stability. Once hired, a tech company employee doesn't need to be concerned about how much income they are receiving each month. It's predetermined and already agreed. For Web3 contributors, they often need to budget ideas ahead of time, and this can easily lead to becoming under or overpaid due to differences in how long the idea actually takes to execute. They also have reduced stability due to the fact that their ideas they suggest might not be selected to receive funding, meaning they may go through periods of receiving no income at all. Higher contribution flexibility can mean contributors are more easily able to allocate their time to the most impactful initiatives. Employees can often work on numerous ideas and different teams whilst they work in an organization. The idea that a team is working on could completely change if they had good reason to make that change. They could end up just addressing a completely different problem or opportunity entirely. New teams can often quickly form to address these emerging problems and opportunities. In Web3 ecosystems, if every idea is funded separately, there is a higher complexity to move to different ideas unless there is enough funding available and a working agreement is made about who is going to be paid for what execution efforts. Alternatively, if these agreements can't be made, then every single idea would need to be approved and funded separately, which delays the speed in which these ideas can be explored and developed. When a token has been created, this complexity is only increased further, as now the contributors involved in this project are now responsible for maintaining and growing that particular idea and ecosystem that this token is used for. This can easily prevent contributors from being able to move as easily between ideas to help with different initiatives that could have generated a lot of impact for the ecosystem. Now let's talk about collaboration. In companies, employees are paid for their contribution efforts each month rather than for the ideas they suggest and execute. This means it doesn't matter which idea an employee is working on, as long as the outcomes from their efforts help to generate impact for the company. Collectively, these employees are all working on the same team, which enables them to more easily identify intersecting problems and opportunities that they could work on collaboratively. Software libraries created in Meta, such as React and GraphQL, were the great examples of that. In Web3 ecosystems, collaboration is more complex, as funding is allocated through ideas, meaning if one team executes those intersecting ideas and doesn't complete their own funded idea, they risk receiving a lower amount of total compensation for their efforts due to that secondary idea not being funded. And it could also risk them not being funded in the future due to not focusing on their original idea, even though this other idea could be actually more impactful to work on. Contributors in an idea funding environment have to compete against each other constantly to receive funding, which doesn't really fully align the incentive to collaborate and give their time to build up these mutually beneficial solutions without the burden of first coming to these new working agreements to work out who's going to be paid for what. And then finally, let's think about decision making. So companies focus on identifying, attracting, and retaining the highest quality people they can to work in their organization. The complexity for companies is comparing and selecting the best contributors. In Web3 ecosystems, this complexity is often far higher, as comparing ideas instead of contributors means a lot more information and complexity is introduced. Many of the voters will struggle to have the right level of experience and context about these ideas to make these really well-informed decisions. Web3 ecosystems that want to fully decentralize this idea selection approach will be pushing this massive complexity to the wider community. This ideas decision complexity is also a persistent problem for Web3 ecosystems, as ideas will constantly change. You don't keep executing the same idea. In comparison, Competent contributors do not change as often. And this is why tech companies will look to simply retain their talented employees that work on one or many ideas at a time. If we want a Web3 technology to reach its true potential and completely change society, then we're really going to want to think about, is a given funding approach more effective than the previous systems and processes that we've seen before? Is it becoming easier or harder for contributors to get involved and receive fair compensation for their efforts? Can the funding process feasibly scale to a wider voting audience? And is the complexity increasing or decreasing for voters over time? There was a time where these existing tech companies were the most novel and new places to watch or work in. It was really exciting to see them rapidly evolve and change to create these new markets and address global problems. Blockchain and ledger technology is going through that same phase now, but eventually it will just become another piece of technology, like existing internet protocols such as HTTP, SMTP, and TCP/IP. Web3 ecosystems are trying to recreate and improve the money and systems that society uses on a day-to-day basis. An effective funding process can help with aligning and fixing the incentives, which will be a key part of making these emerging Web3 ecosystems thrive over the long term. That's everything for this video. The information covered in this video is available at contributors.org. We've got a proposal that explores the opportunity of experimenting with an open source contributors funding process. This funding process is covered in the proposal, and this suggestion can help to achieve many similar benefits that employees have that are working for tech companies. So thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next video.